You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode number 35 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I'm happy to be sharing a conversation that I had with Paul MJ, one of my best friends in program. A few weeks ago, I had his partner, Amy MJ, who was in COSA, as a guest on the podcast, and finally getting around to getting Paul here on the podcast. Before getting to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the previous episode with Sarah. One of the things that Amy and I wanted to discuss was around HIR meetings, healthy intimate relationship meetings. And it was really cool that Sarah actually brought that up in her share when we were talking. In addition to HIR, she also talked about the DID meetings, that's Dissociative Identity Disorder meeting. I did get an email from someone who runs the DID meeting, and I updated that information in the show notes for episode number 34. The DID meeting that they have is 10 a.m. Central Time on SAAtalk.info and SAA-recovery.org. It's actually listed as a Thursday 7 p.m. meeting, and they have requested the ISO make the changes to those websites. But if you do need to find information about the DID SAA meeting, you can email dissociatedalter@gmail.com. And I left that email in the show notes, the description of the episode for episode number 34 with Sarah B. Back to this week's episode. I've known Paul for several years, I think 18. He and I not only have a love of music and share the commonality of intimacy and sexual avoidance, but we also went into service work together at the local level, the intergroup level, and the ISO level. So I was really grateful to finally be able to talk to him. As I mentioned in Amy's episode, which was episode 33, Paul, Tim, and I were working on various ways on how to make the podcast recordings. And Paul and I talked about that in this episode. Thinking about friendship and service, I wanted to do a reading. And for this episode, I really wanted to pick out a reading from Voices of Recovery, and this is from November 26th, which is on page 331. The steps are the spiritual solution to our addiction, leading not only to a life of abstinence from our addictive sexual behaviors, but to a fulfilling life of service to our brothers and sisters in recovery and beyond. Sex Addicts Anonymous, page 99. When I first came through the doors of SAA, I was at my bottom. But I still hoped that there was some way I could hang on to my behaviors without having to change completely. I hoped my new friends in SAA could show me how I could keep doing all my old tricks, but without unmanageability, pain, and consequences. I hoped I could learn how to have control over my addiction without actually giving anything up. Wasn't that what recovery was all about? My new friends told me to keep coming back, to get a sponsor, to work the steps, and to do service. They handed me the format so I could lead the meeting and suggested chores I could do, like keeping the key or updating the group listing in the directory. When I was ready, they invited me along to intergroup meetings and retreats. I discovered that my higher power's plan for me is much bigger than my old deluded dream of managing my addiction. Through working the steps and doing service, I get a life full of love, and purpose, friends, and true intimacy. As a newcomer, I thought this program would offer me no more than a way to enjoy sexual thrills without consequences. I discovered that the greatest gift of the program is love. I thank God for my friends in recovery and the opportunity to be of service to others. And so I chose this reading because of the friendship that I have with Paul and our journey into service. And without further ado, here's the conversation that I had with Paul.
Likewise, it was a little nuts. So, I'm sitting today in resentment that I needed to work through yesterday. So my wife's out of town for the weekend at a retreat, and she has the car. I'm ordering groceries to have them delivered. I had this great plan for today, and I ordered all the groceries I needed for it, and they delivered the wrong stuff yesterday. And so I said, okay. First I dinged them for it, and I was like, no. Let's be spiritual about it. Mistakes happen. We'll just let that go, and I'll just reorder to have it delivered today. So the delivery time came and went. They rescheduled for the middle of our talk today. They're delivering milk, so I'm like, I don't want that to sit outside. And then as it got close to 3 and it still wasn't here, I was thinking, okay, why does God not want me to have milk today? Where it's where I can get in my better places. I can be in the acceptance of, hey, it's not my plan, it's God's plan, and I can get all uppity about it. But seriously, maybe there's a reason, a greater, better reason in the world why I can't have milk right at this instant when I want it. So
Yeah.
that happened to me. I am getting a few reminders from my higher power to, chill the fuck out. Just let things be, and that things will be okay in the long run. It seems to work. And at the same time, I can get into such a tizzy about it. And that tizzy is not good for me. So,
Yeah.
hello. That's my story. I'm here now.
All right. Well, yeah, totally. Welcome, Paul, to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast.
Thank you, Jason. It's exciting and scary to be here.
Yeah. It's such a long time coming. I don't know if you got the chance to listen to Amy's episode, who is your partner.
I did not, but I know she says fantastic things. I didn't want to be jaded by what she said or didn't say.
Yeah. In that conversation, I mentioned that you, me, and Tim, grabbed, I think it was your iPhone in the beginning, trying to find out different ways that we could possibly record conversations after our meeting for use on the podcast. And this was probably 3, 4, 5 years ago. It was quite a while ago.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming, and I enjoyed the idea that you sparked and the idea of the meeting after the meeting, because we have such rich and interesting conversations with recovering sex addicts, right after the meeting ends, when we're sort of more free to, speak our thoughts and our minds and share back and forth in an interactive way. And I just, I thought that was an amazing idea of yours to maybe capture those moments. But even then, of course, right, I'm like, I'm scared. People will listen to what I have to say. I live with these 2 fears. 1, that nobody will listen to me, and 2, that somebody will listen to me. And so somewhere in between is where I'd like to be. But yeah, I remember we had that little recorder that I purchased for the music stuff, that we tried that as well. So
yeah, just thinking of that, the episode that I recorded for my story, which was on episode 3, my original intent was to use my second formal first step, which I had you record. And
Yeah.
that was too scary for me to put out. And so, when you're talking about the fear of people listening, that one got into a lot more details and things. The conversation that I did record for that episode, I got into the specifics, but I kept it vague enough that a lot of
Sure.
the things that would have been fearful for me to be out in the public, I could kind of let that go. But yeah, my original intent was to use the recording that you made of my second formal first step, and I'm glad I didn't. But
what goes on in the rooms of recovery is intense and personal, and so many times I've heard it. People say, I've never said this to anyone else before in my entire life. This is the first time. Who knew that I would be actually speaking this out loud? That was the case for me. That was the case for many people. And I think the anonymity that is part of the 12-step tradition is so freeing and amazing. And personally, it can be somewhat limiting. I know that people benefit from hearing our stories, maybe not all the sordid, gory details that some of us, have, but that they aren't alone, that there's an arc, that there are bunches of people who struggle with the same types of things. And sex addiction is so nasty because it feels like it has to be hidden. You can't talk about it and get help easily because there's such taboo around sex and sexual relations. And I was talking to someone just this weekend who attends both AA meetings and SAA meetings, and he said it like I've heard it a million times. If you go tell somebody you're an alcoholic, and they're like, "Wow, yeah, good on you." Go to those meetings. You tell someone that you're a sex addict, and they're pervert, child molester, evil. You need to be punished. You need to be hurt. And so, even though in my experience, sex addiction runs the gamut of all, so many things, including alcohol, it's the stigma associated with it is just terrible.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a story, if I might.
Yeah.
You might have been present for this. One of our members was facing some legal consequences of their sexual acting out, and had asked for support from members of the fellowship at one of the legal trials. And so I showed up. Several other people showed up. We got to sit in the courtroom while the lawyers went about their business of explaining what the mistake was and how the punishment should be meted out. And what struck me was how the prosecution played the depravity, the horribleness of this person's act. That the lawyer, and I guess that's their job, really reached into the jury's internal fears to sort of demonify, that's not a word, make, to make our friend, the defendant, look really demonic in the things that he was doing. And that, what struck me was that that's what people think of me. That's what people think of sex when they hear the word sex addicts, until we demystify it, until your great work gets reached by so many ears. The instinct is bad, is predator, is really bad. So So anyway, that comes to mind when I think this work that you're doing is really fantastic in that um, we're getting the word out. We're
Yeah.
showing people the span of sex addiction and the problem that it is and the solution as well. So thanks for what you did.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad to be of service.
Ah.
And so I have known you for God, 18
18
years or
years.
so.
Yeah.
And
Oh
so,
my goodness.
I
Yeah.
am familiar with your circles and your story, but
Yeah.
at the beginning of the podcast, I generally like to go over the three circles and to allow our listeners to get to know you really quickly, and then we'll get into your story.
All right. Let me take a look at my notes here. Uh, and I'll start with my inner circle. My inner circle is sex outside my marriage, giving or receiving sexual massage, entering an adult establishment, maintaining secret relationships, dating people outside my marriage, being sexual with anyone when feeling unloving, soliciting sex workers for service, pornography, and masturbation. And um, my inner circle has changed a lot over the 18 years that
Mm-hmm.
you've known me. Not I say a lot. It's gotten added to. My sponsor, when I first developed my inner circle, suggested that we keep it pretty small and tight. But I found that there were ways in which I would circumvent or work around some of the specific things. For example, the one line that I have in there, being sexual with anyone when feeling unloving, um, came up came about. That wasn't in my original set, but it came about after an incident between me and my partner when it wasn't uh, a loving act. The sex that we were having, I was still very much detached. I was, in fantasy, and I was, um, in my own stuff. And she called me on it, and I realized that how in that moment, that intercourse that we were having was reminiscent of the the intercourse I had had outside of my marriage. The transactional aspect of it, the anger and the discomfort. Um, and so it got added back. It got added into my circles as a result. Likewise, masturbation wasn't part of
Mm-hmm.
my inner circle for a long time. When I started, I thought about masturbation a lot because it was a daily routine for me, and sometimes a multiple time daily routine. But I didn't acknowledge or know if it was bad for me. And what my sponsor suggested was a test. He said, if you're not sure if something should go in your inner circle, just try not doing it. And if it turns out that you can avoid doing this activity, um, now, other way around, right? If you can't not do it, put it in your inner circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
causing you problems. You can't not do it. But on the other hand, if you can find yourself not doing it, put it in your inner circle because you don't need to do it. If it's not compulsive, um, but it's taking your time away from other things that you might be doing. Maybe it should go in your inner circle anyway. So,
Hmm.
I spent 10 years, 12 years in recovery where I did not masturbate. I I was doing this experiment to see if I could stop, and after a month, I was like, wow, that's the longest. And then it was 2 months, and then it was 6 months and a year and 5 years and 10 years. And I'm like, apparently, I don't need to do this thing yet, and I can manage not to do it. And then I had a slip. Interacting, via telephone or whatever with some sex worker, and watching pornographic videos, and I ended up, masturbating and to pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized at that point, this needs to be in my inner circle. I don't do this behavior in a healthy way if I do it. I don't when I'm in my best healthy place, I don't seem to need to do it. And when I'm not in a great healthy place, that's when this thing crops up for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, and so at that time, 10 years into recovery, 10 years sober, up until that point, I needed to put pornography and masturbation into my inner circle. Pornography is another one where, just over time, I've come to realize just how devastating it is. And not just to, it's a victimless crime, right? I'm just watching pictures, but, I have now not a great sense, but a much better sense of the industry of pornography and the pain that it brings to people. And, in participating in that industry, I am proliferating the system that causes this pain. That's what I've come to for myself. And so, again, if it's not something that I have to do, if it's not something that I'm compelled to do, then it should be in my inner circle, because it's not a thing that I want to do. What do I want to do? That's my outer circle, right? Mm-hmm. So, in my outer circle, now we're talking like bicycle riding, music. I have to, mention absolutely, volleyball, going to meetings, and spiritual outings, hiking. Did I mention music already? Because music, time with my kids, also date nights with my wife, movie nights. Oh, I love to go out and watch adventure movies. The superhero movies, those are my favorite. Action films. These are all things that I just adore. It's really, really great. And our outer circle is defined as my best recollection as those things that bring us closer to our higher power. Those things that lift us away from the addictive thoughts and the compulsive actions, and bring us into a state of closeness with the higher power of our understanding. And these things absolutely do. I'm thinking I'll talk a little later about my relationship with higher power, but one of the things that jumped out for me as far as developing the outer circle was that there have been times when listening to certain pieces of music has made me certain of a power greater than myself. Just how the sounds change my perspective and my emotions, the rhythms, the sounds, the way that it blends and then creates a tension and then releases it, all of that done in a certain way just brings me to tears, and gets me close to some emotional center of myself, and some spiritual side that I rarely had been able to access. And so geez, I, I- it, it was proof, in a way that something bigger is out there, something greater. The middle circle, I don't actually dwell a lot on my middle circle these days. It is all the routines that get me into the inner circle. The way my sponsor puts it, he likes to treat the inner circle as a steep and slippery slope. He says if I find myself in my middle circle, although some people take it as sort of a warning track, like hey, you weren't paying attention, you're on the edge now, you should steer back. He's like, no, if you're in your inner circle, if you're in your middle circle, you have to run, you have to work hard to get back in your outer circle. Your outer circle is where you should live. And if you find yourself in middle circle, you can't be complacent. You have to work. So that's sort of how I try to treat my middle circle. It's not a you slipped. It is you've got to work. You've got to work hard. You've got to change something, because the times I find myself in my middle circle, inner circle is just around the corner. So middle circle for me is things like cruising, going out and looking at women, usually any degree of ogling, people, body parting. There had been a time when you sort of go around. I go around for a second look. Oh, I saw someone attractive. Let me look again. Let me drive around the corner and come back and look again. And I used to call my acting out flirtation. I didn't have a word for it other than that. Most of my acting out didn't result in sexual intercourse, although it was always on my mind. But I groomed. I talked to people. I made more and more sexual conversation and banter with women, and I reveled in the wordplay and the innuendo and the suggestiveness. That type of suggestiveness or flirting or anything close to that, that's my middle circle starts when I'm like, hey, let me do some sexual wordplay with you. That's it doesn't lead me to great places. So anyway, those are my circles in a nutshell. I probably didn't hit every aspect of that, but
it is quite often, because we have lots of different things in our different circles. Most often on the podcast we just kind of hit the major ones, and there are numerous other little things here and there that we tend to leave off when announcing it at a meeting or something like that. So that's all good. I eventually want to circle back to the music aspect of it, but I know I've talked about on the podcast the music and recovery workshop that we did at the retreat. That it was you again, the same guys, you, me, and Tim. We've known each other a while now. Just have that musical connection. We also had Joanne join us in on that first one. That's right. And so it was such an amazing thing that we were able to do, and to be able to talk about music and higher power. I recollect how each of us had sort of a different musical aspect to bring to that meeting. We're all
all sort of pursuing different genres while at the same time finding a spirituality somewhere in there. So that was really neat, you know. And Joanne's approach, I believe, was especially interesting. It wasn't an aspect that I had searched through before. So pretty cool.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, she had us sing a note.
Yeah.
And then you recorded it and got the analytical spectrograph of all the frequencies and stuff, and analyzing the data. So that was really cool.
The engineer in me is speaking.
Yeah. So, speaking of the engineering and your background, how about we get into your story and what brought you into the rooms of SAA?
Sure.
And whatever you feel comfortable, wherever you feel comfortable starting.
All right. Well, I've sometimes talked on this subject for like a full hour. I'll try to keep it brief. I was born a poor Black child. Let me start there. Anyway, I think my upbringing was pretty typical of what you hear in the rooms. My parents were very loving and very caring of me, and had their own issues that they needed to deal with. And raising kids is always difficult. I know from my own kids. And so they did the best they could, and they did wonderfully. And at the same time, I was a scared child. I was very fearful of home and of people and of censure. And I found an escape in fantasy, in my own imagined worlds, in television. I grew up on, every TV show ever created back in the 70s and 80s. And I began at a very early age just idolizing women. And I don't know where that came from, but I can really trace it back to babysitters and, just early sexualized encounters. And my parents didn't, necessarily, at least not to my knowledge, they didn't bring that to me. That was something hidden that I found on my own that filled me, that calmed me, that helped me with my escapism. My dad had a porn stash, and I found it and, perused it, and then it moved, and I followed, and, it was always there for me to pull from. And my mom, they struggled with their own relationship a lot and eventually divorced. My goal was to leave. I spent most of my time outside of the house, at my friends' houses, at school. I excelled in academia, and that was my ticket out. So I left. When I got out of high school, I went away for college. I went away for grad school, and I always was looking not to look back. I'm not looking back. I'm not going back to those things. Each new place was an escape from the last. But something I've heard, a piece of wisdom that I've heard in program, was true for me then as it is true for me now. Sex addiction isn't where I am or who I'm with; it's who I am. And all along the way, from the very early stages, I flirted. Flirted was the word that I used, as I had spoken about. It was always thinking of one woman or the next woman or the last woman. It was interactions that happened and interactions that didn't happen, and how things might have played out that would have resulted in a sexual encounter. Like I said, there weren't many actual sexual encounters, but it constantly drove me. And it wasn't just one person. When I met my wife, when we began dating, I made a vow. Okay, I'm done with all the sexualizing. I'm with a person. I'm going to be faithful to her, and I wasn't. And then when we got engaged, I said, okay, this is it. We're engaged. So, I'm ready. I'm ready to make this step. I'm engaged. No other women will be part of my, sexual life. And they were. The day of our marriage came, and there were sexual acting out partners that I invited to our wedding. Not I didn't interact with them there, but these are people from my past that I had not closed the door on. So it didn't end there. And then we had our first child, and it was absolutely going to end at our first child, and it didn't. And not only that, it kept escalating. I had been prior to the birth of our first child. I had met a person overseas. And was communicating with them by email back and forth, staying late at work, sending emails back and forth, all the sexual innuendo and power that was building. But it was quote unquote safe because, she wasn't here. We could talk about what we would do, but it wasn't real.
Yeah.
Because she contacted me with some great news just shortly after my son was born. Great news from her perspective. She was coming to the area where I lived, the nearby city, to be an au pair for a year. And she wanted to see me. And I was like, fuck no, I don't want to see you. I knew already that I was carrying so many secrets. And I just had a son, and we were, my wife and I were, barely keeping it together as is with all of the stress of life and job and blah, 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 blah. And she was coming to town, and I knew myself. I knew I would struggle with boundaries. I had no boundaries. I knew I had no boundaries. My boundaries were distance, period. So she came to town. We got together as friends. We had sex. And I swore at that moment, God, I didn't believe in God, mind you, but I said, God, if I can keep this secret from my wife, I will never, ever do this again. Ever. I swear, I feel terrible. I can't stand this, and I stand the damage that it will do to my relationship, my wife, my child, who I promised I would be a good father for. And I got away with it for a little while. A year went by. I didn't make any more contact with that particular person. My wife was pregnant with our second child, and I quit my job. I was looking for sort of a clean start and a new place to be. I had developed lots of flirtatious relationships in this old work, and I was starting new. I'm doing this geographic. If I just stop everything old, get away from that, and get into the new stuff, everything will be fine. But the time between jobs stretched on, and things got stressful at home. My wife was now 6 months, 8 months, 7 months pregnant, and she came to me with all of the collective information that I had left about, emails and messages and receipts and blah, 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 all the stuff from, evidence of my acting out that I always lied about. And she asked me to explain it to her, just one more time so that it made sense. And I decided to come clean about the woman who had visited the U.S. And that I had had sex with, because that was what was killing me the most. And I'm doing a fresh start. Let me let go of that, and then I'll be able to go back on cruise control. But she knew it was the tip of the iceberg, and it was the day, week, month, months of my life, as my partner dug and dug and dug and dug for more evidence and more shreds of my acting out. And I had it. I was like a never ending well of acting out behaviors and hurtful behaviors and lies and deceit and sex and obsession. I just, and there were things that I forgot about. She wanted to know it all. And there were things that I had forgotten about that when they came out later sort of opened up a hole, all opened up a sore, anew. And there were some things that I just wasn't ready to admit, that when I became ready to admit, you lied again because you didn't tell me about it, when I asked you to tell me everything. And it was horrible. What happened was I immediately went out and found a therapist. I didn't know what a therapist was or what they did, but I had to find one because I had to fix this. And it was actually my partner who found Carnes's book, Out of the Shadows.
Yeah.
And, she handed it to me and I read it, and it was like reading a biography of myself. I could not believe that there were other people that that had undergone this sort of thing, that were struggling with this and that couldn't stop. A bit about my background and upbringing. I grew up in an alcoholic family, a drug addicted family, and all of that stuff scared the crap out of me. And so I made a decision. I will never drink. I will never smoke. I will never do drugs. I will live my life clean of all substances. And so I have. I'm over 50 now, and I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do. It's not part of who I am. I had no idea that there was such a thing as sex addiction. That there were addictions where my body chemistry physically changed, that didn't involve injecting something or eating something or smoking something. Here it was me. And I was addicted, and this book just laid it out for me. So I went to look for a meeting, and I went to, I looked on my chart for, the closest meeting to me. I went to a couple of different S programs to start with, just trying them out, and they did not fit. The people in the rooms didn't seem like me. The solutions that they offered didn't feel right. And then I showed up in an SAA room one Thursday night, and it was like coming home. The abstinence statement from our program was clear and fit with my own values. The people were people I didn't know them, but their stories were similar to mine, and they were living, healthy, recovering lives, and that was the start of my journey in SAA. So, and that was 18 years ago. So
yeah,
it's been a long journey.
yeah. So I think I found the rooms probably a couple months before you, but I was exclusively going to a Wednesday night meeting, the one in San Jose, Santa Clara. And so it was about another year before I started going to that Thursday night meeting. And that's right, pretty shortly after you got there. So you're basically part of that meeting for me when I first started. So I've known you since that time.
Yeah, man, those were good times. I mean, good times and horrible times.
Yeah, yeah.
But the recovery and the people and the attitudes and the solutions that I found there, I just wanted to sing its praises. I was feeling so good, and I ran home, to my partner and said, "Hey, you got to try this stuff. This is awesome." And she was like, "Fuck you."
Yeah.
You don't deserve to feel better. Which was, that's part of our story. It took a while for me to get to a point for myself where recovery became not so much about fixing my marriage, but fixing my life and recognizing the degree of improvement that I had created through my own codependency with my partner. Just that I had been her best friend and closest confidant for more than our married time, at the time. And I was now the problem, and I could not both be the problem and the solution. I needed to find myself first. I needed to get on solid ground before I had anything that I could offer other than I'm working on it. I keep coming back. I keep working on it, and I found something that is sustainable. Sorries don't help. You have to live it. You have to live the solution.
Yeah, and just thinking about being at that meeting, and both you and I were secretaries of that meeting doing service.
Yeah.
And I know for me it was a little intimidating. I'd done literature at my other meeting, which was kind of a smaller meeting, and as the years grew on, the Thursday night meeting grew bigger and bigger, and secretarying a large meeting was something new, and that's what really kicked me into overdrive into doing service. And I wanted to ask your perspective on service, and then moving on to our co-venture in joining Intergroup.
Yeah. Well, I think as far as international service goes, you have been the biggest impetus for me. You helped me overcome a lot of my fears or imagined barriers by just your willingness to go in. So thank you for opening that world up for me. When it comes to service at a meeting level, it's kind of where I feel my strong suit is. Growing up, and I did a lot of theater growing up, and I did a lot of performance, and I chaired a bunch of meetings at work, blah, blah, blah. I already had, a position of authority and sort of project management sort of background. And so secretarying the meeting was sort of just following the script. And I was always amazed because when I came in, and I don't know if it's like this for everyone, I suspect it is, the secretary seemed like the most recovered guy in the room. I was like, damn, I showed up, and this guy, he had it together. He was running. I remember it was a guy, you probably remember the guy who was secretary back at the time. He just seemed to have it together. I was like, hey, sponsor me. I don't know who these other people are, but you clearly have what it takes to. And although absolutely, he's a great guy and had tons of recovery and great things to offer. The secret was the script. Secretarying for me was, here's the magic book of secretarying. You read what's in there and just be a good guy, a good person. And read what's there, make decisions as you need to, be of service. We say in our meetings, right? Our leaders, quote unquote, are but trusted servants. Ultimately, we're in service of the sex addict who walks in the door. And it's our mandate to help them, not to boss them. And that was so easy and refreshing. I didn't have to tell people what to do or how to do. I just read the script I kept the meeting going. I kept the order, and I looked to group conscience. That worked great. And, after being, treasurer and librarian and music guy and secretary at that meeting and other meetings and blah, blah, blah. And it was the retreat, right? Go to the retreat, and I found out that there were a whole bunch of sex addicts local to me that I never knew. They were, in the nearby city, and I'm in this little suburb, right? So I'm like, wow. You go to the city, and they're like, 100 or 200 or so folk who just show up regularly, and they were at the retreat, and they were doing service to an even larger group. Who is this larger? Oh, there was intergroup. Oh, intergroup is sort of a collection of all of the groups in the larger area, coming together and talking about stuff that's important to not just a single group, but all of the groups. And it had always been something that I wanted to embark on, but it wasn't until, you were my enabler.
I think it was,
I'm going to do it
both ways. I was interested in doing work with the intergroup, but I was too afraid to venture there on my own. And so I think we were both kind of the Sam and Frodo going into this adventure together. Yeah.
Well put. No, it was, and so, I really relished our weekend drives up to the city, our monthly drives. It was, such great connection between the two of us. And all things program and not, we got to chat about on the drive up and back. And it's just really incredible time, and a really exhausting Saturday.
Yeah. We would get up, early in the morning, get ourselves up to the 8:15 meeting, which is, powerful, and then doing breakfast or whatever, and getting ourselves over to intergroup and doing service there, and then the entire ride back down to the South Bay.
Which was slower than the ride up because of traffic. So
yeah.
Oh, yeah, and of course, intergroup is a stepping stone into international service at the ISO, which you've undertaken to a large degree, and I was tapped to be in various roles. So, and it's amazing to be part of that larger system. And I recently saw a diagram of how the ISO relationship is to the individual group, and it's sort of an upside down triangle, right? The groups are autonomous, and ISO is ultimately accountable to the groups. The governance, if I dare use such a word for a 12-step program, is not always well looked upon by many of the individuals that I've seen at meeting level. They want to know, what's ISO or even intergroup have to do with me. ISO wants us to do something. That's government getting in the way of
area formation.
Area formation, that's a big thing. And one thing that I'll touch on recently, I've started attending these meetings for BIPOC, Black. Now you're going to have to edit this. Black, Indigenous people of color, right?
Yep.
Black and Indigenous people of color, right? BIPOC. And we are planning a retreat, which we're very excited about. That's coming up at the end of this month. So October 29th, 30th, 31st, that weekend. And we began advertising the retreat. We on the planning committee, and it was we ran afoul immediately of the International Service Organization because of our misuse of the term SAA. There are very specific rules about who can be SAA and who can't be SAA, and when you're allowed to use whatever symbol, or and they're legally driven, and we were just blissfully unaware. But hearing back from our International Service Organization, there were a couple of things that came up. One was the recognition that at the group level, our understanding of the International Service Organization is still quite limited, and how it all fits together. But the other thing was what looked like a huge reaction of the International Service Organization to this Black and Indigenous people of color organization within SAA, which for me highlighted the need for groups that cater to people of color, or people with specific needs. We've got meetings that are male only, right? SAA is for everyone, right? But we've got meetings that are male only. We've got meetings that are female only. We've got meetings that are transgender. We've got meetings that are homosexual. We've got bisexual meetings. We've got and we're like, okay, we're going to have a meeting for people who identify as BIPOC, and the ISO seemed, to my perspective, to be sort of taken aback at this organization, this sub-organization within SAA. And so I think there was some large degree of misunderstanding about, what the organization is about. We're all about bringing the recovery to the addict who still suffers. And some groups are less represented within SAA as a whole than others. We want to make sure that those, less represented groups are recognized and are finding what they need within SAA, finding the recovery from sex addiction that they are looking for within SAA. And so we continue with that mission and hope to be a bigger part of the organization moving forward. So that's what I'll share about that.
Yeah, thank you for doing so. I want to make sure that we on the podcast are inclusive with all different types of addicts, all different types of identifications, and so we have had a few BIPOC people on early on, but like a majority, a lot of people that have been on have been white and have not catered to reaching out to the BIPOC community. And so I'm grateful for you bringing that up here. And hopefully we can put a link for the retreat. Your episode will be coming up in kind of the middle of October when it's released. So there should be enough time for people who are interested in checking that out in order to register for that. Yeah, I wanted to circle back to our drives up and down to intergroup and just getting to know each other. And a lot of times, we would talk about all the things that we're watching on back in the day. I think it was when we're still renting out DVDs from Netflix, but Netflix and other sci-fi shows and all things we were watching. But with our conversations, we would have just fun conversations, and then they would just morph into delving deep into our relationship issues. And one of the things that both of us kind of discovered right around the same time is our discovery about intimacy and sexual avoidance, sexual anorexia, and that we identified very similarly to that. And so not only have I had you as, a brother in program, a brother in service, but a brother in ISA type of stuff. So we've been able to bounce those
Yeah.
things off of each other, and was wondering if you wanted to talk about your experience with ISA.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it had a humble beginning. Sort of looking at um, stopping my sexual acting out. I felt like I was a extremely sexual creature. I felt like I couldn't stop fantasy. I couldn't stop acting on the sexual fantasies. And when I got into SAA, there just didn't seem to be any half measure around, entertaining these fantasies when I was constantly being triggered by women. So I made a conscious decision to stop all the acting out, stop all the acting out behaviors. So much so that when I would walk through a mall, this is a interesting story, right? I could hear the clicks of women's heels. My head would turn. I had to look so much input. I found it easier to just take off my glasses so that the world was sort of blurred out. And I found some peace in that. But I had to find a way to stop all of this constant triggering. And I turned something off. I decided, and tried my best not to respond sexually to all of these triggers, to sort of mute that part of me. And what happened over years of practicing this, let me just turn off my sexuality, was I found that I could not do it selectively. So, although I was not being sexual outside my marriage anymore, I found that I wasn't being sexual inside my marriage either. One of the jokes my partner created was, what was the point of being married to a sex addict when you don't get to have sex, And she was very confused, right? It wasn't that I was, she wondered, right? I guess she wondered if I was having sex other places. I don't know what she wondered, but I wasn't having sex anywhere else. I also wasn't having sex in our relationship, and it was a change, or an apparent change, from the way I had been before I started in recovery. As I wasn't aware of this tap that I had turned off for many years. And some of the conversations with you helped bring out for me just that I had become a sexual anorexic. And the way it sort of presented for me was all of the stars had to be aligned perfectly in order for me to have sex with my wife. Kids had to be asleep. I couldn't have any work meetings the following morning. So it had to be like a weekend, but not one where I was too tired or she was too tired. I had to be in the mood. She had to be in the mood. The cats had to be out of the room. Blah, 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 blah. If and only if all of these things were perfectly aligned, then we could enjoy each other physically, intimately. And it was hurting. It was hurting our marriage that I had lost my spontaneity, so to speak. That I had to have things my way. That I had gained boundaries, and that I was saying no more often than yes. It wasn't healthy for our relationship, and it wasn't healthy for me specifically. I came to realize that I was avoiding this intimacy. I had turned my sexual craving sort of upside down. Maybe the acting out was uh, around lack of intimacy, fear of intimacy. And now that the acting out had stopped, all that was left was an intimate relation with my partner versus my fear. I was afraid of that intimacy, of showing up for real. And I still maintain that to a degree, but our program remarkably has people like me in it too, and plenty of them who struggle with this same sort of thing. And so, in as much as one can work the 12 steps around sexual acting out, one can work the steps around sexual acting in, as we call it, where, instead of engaging in positive intimacy, physical or not, with my partner, I avoid by watching TV. The same things that I talked about at the beginning, right? Fantasy, TV, work, whatever, right? I can put myself someplace else in order to avoid the scary thing of a human to human connection. That's how it manifests, and it got bad. It reached a low point where, she was expressing to me her extreme unhappiness and dissatisfaction, and I didn't know what to do about it, but the steps help. And I feel like I've been able to, take some wrong steps about it, but to be more open, and to show up and to be more transparent and more intimate overall. But I still have to watch it, I still have to be wary. That's sort of how it manifests for me. I don't know that it's like that for everyone, but it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It is.
Being at the convention this past year, over the past several years, Deb W and a couple of others have been doing workshops on intimacy and sexual avoidance, and they've done ISA awareness campaigns. They were flyering, letting people know that that there's going to be these meetings on Zoom, and this was way a couple of years prior to the pandemic, and getting the word out. But at the convention, the way the meeting grid was sectioned out, there were a couple of meetings that were right there in the middle of the grid, and so a bunch of people saw SAA meeting, I'm going to go to that, and they started hearing these stories, and it's like, oh man, that opened up my eyes, and I had never heard of this. And so I think it's becoming a bigger thing, and I know that Paul M at the ISO has been talking about trying to get that out into the forefront, to get the word out about ISA meetings, and that several other people in the program suffer from this as well. That it's the as they put it, the acting out is the little iceberg that's above the water, and all the intimacy and sexual avoidance and the fears and things are the things below the surface that drive all those things. And it was an eye-opening thing for me, something that I still have to continue to work on. I've restructured my circles in order to accommodate sexual acting in as well as sexual acting out.
Nice.
And so it's an active thing, not a passive thing, because I've let the relationship go passive for far too long, and not taking ownership of it can be difficult to cultivating a healthy relationship.
Yeah. one of the experiments that I did, I won't say it's a failed experiment. I got data from it. Was I started saying with the attitude of just say yes. You remember the old ad campaign, just say no to drugs, right? You know, I decided that if I said yes every time, you know, my wife approached me, just say yes, you know, get over your fears and just say yes, that things would be better. And they seemed better for a little while, but it was still avoidant behavior. I took no responsibility of initiative. I didn't express my desire, just my willingness. And the relationship wasn't sustainable just on, oh, well, if you want to, I guess I will too. That wasn't right, you know? So what it did for me is it relieved one of my fears that I wouldn't be able to be sexual on, you know, just being asked at any given moment, which is one of my fears, you know, just, well, what if I can't do this thing? I have such hang-ups around that. But at the same time, you know, it being a failed experiment, I acknowledge that I want to be able to positively express my desire for intimacy with my partner, and not just my willingness to go along with it. And that's good and important work to be done. I'm glad that I learned it, but, you know, sorry that things didn't work out as I expected. I'll just say yes, and then I'm absolved of all responsibility. Everything's good, but not really.
Yeah. Just looking at the clock here, we've been going for a while. There is still one more thing that I wanted to get to, at least for me, before closing out, was you know, outer circle stuff and the yearly, the annual holiday jam that we've done. You know, not only have we done, you know, music at the retreats and the talent show and stuff, but getting to hang out after one of our meetings every December. And I think we originally started doing it at a program friend's house, and then it just morphed into, you know, since we're all there, why don't we do it after the meeting? But you know, one of our outer circle things is we bring our instruments in December and play some music, mostly holiday music, but you know, occasionally we can get off into jamming into whatever, and you bring your clarinet and banjo, and you know, I bring my guitar, and we've had cello and piano and all sorts of different instruments, and
trumpet, French horn, singers. Oh my goodness, we've had, you know, depending on the year, you know, it's whoever brings their whatever they've got, you know, just bring the music, bring the joy. It's funny. I grew up in a musical family, you know, of sorts. My dad played semi-professionally piano, and it was just sort of always in the background of my upbringing. And it's not something that is something that my wife partakes in. And so for a little while, you know, knowing that I had this area of my life that was just mine, I used it for evil. You know, I used that space to act out. And so when I first got into program and started again working on stuff that, working on inner circle stuff, you know, I stopped doing music because I had been the space that it gave me to act out. And slowly, as I began to recover, I found that music was where I found spirituality. music was this connecting thing that, sure, I could piss on it and I could turn it into something sour, but it was always going to be there for me. And I made my amends with my music, and oh my goodness, the world that it opened up. There's so many wonderfully talented, musically talented and otherwise, folk within the program. And whether in the program or not, just generating the sounds, being in the environment, hearing the tonalities, participating in the rhythms, and using it to connect with you, to connect with the other musicians, to connect with others in the program. It's just been amazing. I'm grateful to have this in common with you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And those holiday jams are a blast.
Yeah, last year we did it on Zoom, and it became more of kind of individual performances, and we did not organize it at all, and it worked. I just remember we were announcing it, and wasn't sure how it was all going to come together, but it did. We had experience doing talent shows on Zoom, so it was kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
But now that our Thursday night meeting is back in person this year, fingers crossed that we can actually do an in-person holiday music jam. So. Yeah.
I tell you that doing music for the internet, it's doing music and it's nice. I get something out of it, but there's an interactive part of music that I experience that is part of my spiritual experience, that I have not yet been able to generate or recreate in these asynchronous, inline forums. I can't easily react and respond at the speed and at the sort of instinctual level that happens when one is playing live with others. So it's I'm looking forward to playing again with you and all of our friends.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Anything else you wanted to cover?
Oh gosh, we've been over a lot. There's always more, and I did want to thank you for inviting me to be here on the podcast. Sorry it's taken so long to get here, but I hope that this particular episode and all the episodes just get heard by somebody who relates to some small bit, some nugget that seems familiar to them, and that they can take that little nugget, that little seed, and grow it into some recovery for themselves. That's always the bottom line. My sex addiction is my super curse and my superpower. That I've got it allows me to be of service to others who are like me, who need help, like I have. So I'm glad to be here, and so grateful that you created this forum for me and for all of us.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for you for joining us this week, and for all, and I will repeat, all of the service that you do at local level, intergroup level, and international level. The amount of service work that you do inspires me, and I inspire you, and so we get this kind of circular effect, and it's been just an amazing gift, and I value our friendship, and thank you so much for joining us this week.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Jason. My pleasure.
All right,
I catch you.
See you, Paul. Bye. Once again, many thanks to Paul for joining us here on the podcast this week. It was such a blast just to hang out on Zoom for about an hour and a half and have this wonderful conversation. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned a few things that I will be posting in the show notes. The first was something that we talked about in this conversation, which was around the BIPOC retreat. That is coming up at the end of October. And again, that's Black, Indigenous, and Persons of Color. And so I will be leaving that information, the contact information and registration in the show notes. The other thing was something that I brought up in Amy's episode around the fact that both Paul and Amy were guest speakers at SAA and COSA conventions. Paul spoke at the 2018 convention in Oakland, and despite the fact that he's one of my best friends, it is one of my favorite SAA speaker shares. Not only is it deeply emotional, but Paul's sense of humor is there, and it really covered a lot of ground in terms of step work and growth. If you are interested in checking that out, that is on the COSA website, and I will leave that link in the show notes as well. I actually got to see Paul at our in-person meeting tonight as I'm recording this, and I would mention to him that I was going to throw on some music at the end of this episode. Paul is really into jazz, and we have this wonderful connection through that. And I remember early on jamming with him and a couple of our other program friends playing Dave Brubeck's Take 5, and we had a wonderful time doing that. He and I also have this wonderful connection over Vince Guaraldi, who does the music for the Charlie Brown, Snoopy cartoons, and thought about throwing that on here. But the song that really stood out for me was John Coltrane's My Favorite Things. When we were talking about at the retreat having the music and recovery workshop, one of the songs that he brought up was this piece by John Coltrane. I believe it was his father that turned him on to this, and so there's some childhood memories there. But one of the things that's really cool about Coltrane's version of My Favorite Things is it takes the original song, which is about 2.5 minutes, and stretches it out to this 13-minute piece of music, which allows for this wonderful build-up using the first phrase of My Favorite Things, and it doesn't really conclude until about the 12-minute mark with the second half of the phrase. And so you get this wonderful build up and solo, and trading back and forth between Coltrane and the piano. And so anyway, I really wanted to play a little bit of that on this episode. Such a wonderful piece of music. Not only do Paul and I share our love for jazz, but all other types of music as well. And early on, when I started making my spiritual mixes, Paul was one of the people that I would give CDs to. So I'm about to wrap up this episode. I got a couple of wonderful pieces of feedback that I think I'm going to save for next week's episode, since this one is running a bit long, and I am trying to finish up the recording so I can get this out on time. So if you want to provide any feedback for the podcast, please write to us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you're interested in being a guest or want to contact me directly, you can email me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And so with that, I'm going to wrap this episode up. Thanks so much for listening in this week. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.